My wife left me a note saying she needed freedom, so I gave her exactly what she asked for. My name is Darian Holt, and I'm a 34-year-old architect who spent 8 years thinking I was building a life with someone who was actually just using me as a foundation while she figured out her next move. That Tuesday morning started like any other, with coffee brewing and the sound of Celine's heels clicking against our hardwood floors. But there was something different in her walk, something sharp and determined that should have been my first warning. She stood in our kitchen doorway, perfectly dressed in that expensive navy suit I'd bought her for her promotion, and announced her latest plan with the casual confidence of someone ordering lunch. "I'm hosting Christmas dinner this year," she said, not asked. 35 people. My family, your family, plus some friends. It'll be perfect. I looked up from my breakfast, already calculating the chaos in my head. Our house could barely handle 10 people comfortably, let alone 35. The cost alone would drain our savings, not to mention the stress of coordinating everything. But Celine had already made the decision, like she always did. 35 people. I repeated, trying to keep my voice level. "Celine, we don't have the space or the budget for something that big." She waved her hand dismissively, the same gesture she used whenever I brought up practical concerns about her grand plans. "Don't be so negative, Darian. We'll make it work. We always do. Except by we, she meant me. I would handle the planning, the cooking, the cleanup, while she played the perfect hostess and took all the credit. It was the same pattern that had defined our marriage for years. Celine came up with expensive ideas, and I figured out how to make them happen without destroying our finances. I watched her apply her lipstick in the hallway mirror, each stroke precise and practiced. Everything about Celine was calculated, from her morning routine to her career moves. She'd married me because I was stable, reliable, someone who could provide the security she needed while she chased her ambitions. For 8 years, I told myself that was love, that her need for me was the same as caring about me. Standing there in our kitchen, watching her prepare for another day of charming clients and colleagues, I finally understood the difference. 3 days later, I found the note. It was waiting on our granite kitchen counter like a landmine disguised as stationery. Celine's perfect handwriting stretched across expensive paper, each word chosen to deliver maximum impact with minimum effort. "Darian, I found something real with Rylan. I can't pretend anymore that what we have is enough for me. I need passion, excitement, someone who understands my ambitions. I'm staying at his place while I figure out my next steps. Don't try to contact me. I need space to think clearly about our future. Take care of yourself. Celine." No apology. No acknowledgement of 8 years together. No mention of the Christmas dinner she'd planned just days earlier. Just a polite dismissal wrapped in the language of self-discovery. I read it twice, waiting for the anger or heartbreak that should have followed. Instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. The constant tension I'd been carrying, the feeling of never being quite enough for her standards, suddenly lifted from my shoulders. Celine wanted passion and excitement. She could have it. What she couldn't have was the financial safety net I'd been providing while she figured herself out. My first call went to Orrin Beck, the best family attorney in the city. Orrin had handled my business contracts for years, and I trusted his methodical approach to complex problems. "Abandonment with a written confession," he said after I read him Celine's note. "She's made this almost too easy, Darian. Most people spend months trying to prove what she just handed us in writing. Within 2 hours, every joint account was frozen pending legal review. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Celine had a habit of expensive impulse purchases, and I wasn't about to fund her journey of self-discovery with Rylan. My personal savings account, the one I'd maintained separately throughout our marriage, remained untouched. 8 years of careful financial planning had taught me the value of independence, even within a partnership. I walked through our house that evening, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The expensive furniture Celine had insisted we needed, the artwork she'd chosen to impress visitors, the kitchen renovation she'd demanded last spring. None of it felt like home anymore. It felt like a stage set for someone else's life, a life I'd been paying for, but never really living. I drove to my cabin in the mountains the next morning. It was a small place I'd bought before meeting Celine, back when I thought solitude was something to be avoided rather than treasured. Celine had always hated the cabin, calling it rustic in a way that wasn't meant as a compliment. No cell service, No luxury amenities, just pine trees and silence. For the first time in years, I remembered why I'd loved it. The air was clean and sharp, cutting through the fog of compromise and accommodation that had clouded my thinking for too long. I spent 3 days hiking, cooking simple meals, and sleeping without checking my phone every few minutes. The constant noise in my head, the endless mental calculations about Celine's moods and needs, finally quieted. By the third day, I realized I hadn't thought about her once since arriving. Not with anger or sadness, but not at all. She'd become irrelevant to my peace of mind faster than I'd thought possible. The cabin had always been my retreat, but now it felt like my reintroduction to myself. When I finally checked my phone, 17 missed calls and 12 text messages waited for me. All from Celine. All increasingly desperate. The messages told a story I could have written myself. The first few were angry, demanding to know why her cards weren't working and accusing me of playing games. Then came confusion as she realized the accounts were actually frozen, not just experiencing technical difficulties. Finally, panic set in as she understood that her comfortable lifestyle had disappeared along with access to our joint finances. "This is ridiculous, Darian. I need access to our money. You can't just cut me off because you're upset. Our money." Even in a crisis, Celine couldn't acknowledge that most of it came from my income, my savings, and my careful financial management over the years. The last message was different, softer, trying a new approach. "I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But we can work this out if we talk like adults. Call me back when you're ready." I deleted the messages without responding. Celine was used to managing me through a combination of charm, guilt, and emotional manipulation. What she wasn't prepared for was complete silence. My lack of response would drive her crazy, force her to confront a situation she couldn't control through her usual methods. Oren was waiting in his office when I returned to the city, his desk covered with documents that looked like weapons in the right hands. "Celine's attorney contacted me," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "They're requesting immediate access to joint assets for basic living expenses. Apparently, your wife is discovering what freedom costs." The legal papers were beautifully crafted, each paragraph building an airtight case for why Celine deserved nothing beyond her personal belongings. Her own note provided the foundation, written evidence of abandonment that would be impossible to dispute in court. Oren had also pulled financial records showing her spending patterns over the past year, documenting a lifestyle that far exceeded her own income. She spent $18,000 on clothes and dining out in the last 6 months alone, he noted, all while contributing less than 30% to household expenses. "The judge will find that very interesting." We spent 2 hours reviewing strategy, building a case that was methodical, legal, and completely devastating to any claim Celine might make on assets she'd never helped acquire. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting what I'd worked for from someone who'd already proven she had no respect for our partnership. Rylan Vance called me the next evening, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of a man who thought he'd won something valuable. "Darian, this is Rylan. I think we need to talk man to man about this situation with Celine." I almost laughed at his tone, like we were colleagues discussing a business deal, instead of two men whose lives had collided because he'd decided my wife was worth pursuing. "She's worried about you," he continued. "This whole financial thing seems pretty extreme. Maybe we could work something out that makes sense for everyone." Rylan was a corporate lawyer who specialized in mergers and acquisitions, the type who solved problems by finding ways for everyone to profit. He clearly thought our situation could be negotiated like a business transaction. "What exactly are you proposing, Rylan?" I asked, genuinely curious about his approach. "Look, Celine made a difficult choice, but it doesn't have to destroy anyone's life. You're obviously hurt, but cutting off her access to money isn't going to bring her back. Why don't we arrange some kind of temporary support while you both figure out the divorce details?" Temporary support. He wanted me to subsidize their relationship while they decided whether their passion was worth the financial sacrifice. "That's an interesting perspective," I told Rylan, letting silence stretch between us until he felt compelled to fill it. "I mean, you're both adults. These things happen. The mature approach is to handle it with dignity, right?" His nervous laughter revealed more than his words. Rylan was discovering that stealing someone's wife came with unexpected complications, like the wife expecting to maintain her previous standard of living. Here's what I find fascinating, Rylan, I said, my voice staying perfectly calm. You pursued a married woman, convinced her to abandon her home and husband, and now you're calling me to negotiate her financial support. That's not mature. That's lazy. The silence on his end stretched longer this time. She chose you because you promised her excitement and passion. Now you want me to pay for that excitement. Do you see the problem with your proposal? Look, man, you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. But Celine made her choice when she wrote that note. She chose freedom over security. Now she gets to experience what that actually means. I hung up before he could respond, but his desperation had already told me everything I needed to know about how their great romance was progressing. Celine appeared at my office building 2 days later, her designer composure cracking around the edges like expensive paint in the sun. I saw her through my window, pacing on the sidewalk below, probably working up the courage for whatever performance she'd planned. When she finally arrived at my door, her usual confidence was replaced by something I'd rarely seen from her: genuine vulnerability. Darian, please. We need to talk about this money situation. I can't even buy groceries. Her voice carried a desperation that would have moved me 6 months ago. Now it just sounded like someone facing the consequences of their own choices. You have a job, Celine. You have your own income. You know my salary barely covers my basic expenses. The apartment, my car payment, my credit cards. I counted on our joint account for everything else. There it was, the truth she'd never admitted during our marriage. She'd structured her entire lifestyle around access to my income while treating her own paycheck as spending money. That was when we were married, I said. When we were partners. You ended that partnership when you decided Rylan offered something better. Her eyes filled with tears, but they looked calculated rather than genuine. I made a mistake, okay? I got caught up in something that felt exciting and new. But that doesn't mean you have to destroy my life over it. I'm not destroying anything, Celine. I'm protecting what's mine. Oren had coached me on this conversation, warned me that Celine would try emotional manipulation when financial pressure mounted. You wrote in your note that you needed space to think clearly about our future. I'm giving you that space and the clarity that comes with financial independence. She shifted tactics, trying to look smaller and more helpless than the confident woman who'd planned a 35-person Christmas dinner just a week ago. I can't afford to live without access to our savings. You know that. My rent alone is $3,000 a month. $3,000 a month for an apartment she'd chosen to share with Rylan, funded by money she'd planned to take from our marriage. The audacity was breathtaking, but not surprising. Then maybe you should have considered the financial implications before abandoning your marriage for someone else. It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned. These things just happen sometimes. But I'd seen her browser history, her deleted text messages, her carefully orchestrated schedule changes over the past 3 months. This hadn't just happened. It had been planned with the same attention to detail she brought to her Christmas dinner announcements, except she'd forgotten to plan for the part where actions have consequences. Oren filed the preliminary divorce papers the next Monday, each document crafted to close every loophole Celine might try to exploit. The petition included her note as evidence of voluntary abandonment, financial records showing her minimal contribution to our household, and a timeline of her relationship with Rylan that painted a clear picture of premeditated infidelity. The beauty of her written confession, Oren explained, is that it eliminates any possibility of her claiming irreconcilable differences or mutual separation. She explicitly stated that she found something better and was ending the marriage to pursue it. That's textbook abandonment with cause. Within 48 hours, Celine's attorney was requesting a settlement conference, hoping to avoid a trial that would expose her behavior in open court. But I wasn't interested in negotiating with someone who'd already proven they couldn't be trusted to honor agreements. The legal process would take months, but the outcome was essentially predetermined. Celine had written her own defeat in that elegant handwriting I'd once found so attractive. Every word of her note was evidence against her. Every phrase a nail in the coffin of any claim she might make on assets she'd walked away from. She could fight it, Oren noted, but she'd lose publicly and expensively. Most people in her position take whatever settlement they can get and disappear quietly. News travels fast in professional circles, especially news involving scandalous behavior and public disgrace. Within 2 weeks, Whispers about Celine and Ryland's affair had spread through their law firm like wildfire. Ryland's reputation as a serious attorney was being undermined by gossip about his personal drama, while Celine found herself frozen out of the social networks she'd worked years to cultivate. I learned about their professional troubles through mutual acquaintances who felt compelled to share updates, as if I needed to know that karma was handling the situation without my intervention. Ryland's biggest client had requested a different attorney after learning about his role in destroying a marriage, claiming they needed someone who demonstrated better judgment in their personal life. Celine's promotion track was quietly derailed as partners questioned her stability and decision-making abilities. Their passionate romance was becoming an expensive liability that neither could afford professionally. The irony wasn't lost on me. Celine had left me for someone who could offer her excitement and career advancement, only to discover that their affair was actually damaging both their careers. The very ambition that had driven her to seek something better was being undermined by the method she'd chosen to pursue it. Justice has a sense of humor sometimes. I had dinner alone at Romano's that Friday, the same restaurant where Celine and I had celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. She'd insisted on the most expensive menu that night, ordering wine that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. I'd paid the bill gladly then, proud to give her whatever she wanted. This time, I ordered a simple pasta dish and a glass of house wine, enjoying the meal more than any expensive celebration I'd ever attended with her. The absence of her constant critique about the service, the food, and the other diners made everything taste better. I wasn't there to prove a point or create some symbolic moment of closure. I just wanted good food in a quiet atmosphere, without having to manage someone else's expectations or mood. But sitting there alone, I realized how much of my life had been spent performing for Celine's approval, trying to meet standards that shifted whenever I got close to reaching them. The waiter was friendly without being intrusive, the food was prepared well, and I could eat at my own pace without rushing to accommodate someone else's schedule. Small freedoms, but freedoms nonetheless. When I left, I felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with the meal and everything to do with the simple pleasure of making decisions based solely on what I wanted. Orrin called me into his office the following Monday with news that would have worried me a month ago, but now just felt like another piece falling into place. Celine's attorney wants to discuss temporary support while the divorce is pending, he said. They're claiming she'll face genuine hardship without access to marital assets. Temporary support meant I'd be paying for her apartment, her lifestyle, her relationship with Ryland while they figured out whether their passion was worth the financial sacrifice. It was exactly what Ryland had proposed during his awkward phone call, just presented through legal channels. What's their argument? I asked, though I could guess. Financial dependency developed during the marriage, reasonable expectation of continued support, basic fairness doctrine. The usual appeals to sympathy and precedent. Orrin pulled out a thick folder filled with documentation that would destroy any sympathy argument. Fortunately, we have evidence of her minimal financial contribution, her excessive spending patterns, and her voluntary abandonment of the marriage for another relationship. No judge will order you to subsidize her affair. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Celine would sit in court and explain to a judge why her husband should pay her bills while she lived with her boyfriend. The situation would be humiliating, but she'd brought it on herself with choices that prioritized short-term excitement over long-term consequences. Celine showed up at my house Tuesday evening, her last-ditch attempt to avoid the humiliation of asking a judge to force me to fund her new life. She dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing the vulnerable look over her usual power suit armor. Darian, please don't make me go through with this court thing. It's embarrassing for both of us. I invited her in, curious about what approach she'd take. The house she'd abandoned looked different now, cleaner and more organized without her constant redecorating projects cluttering every surface. It's embarrassing for you, I corrected. I'm just protecting my financial interests from someone who explicitly stated they were ending our marriage for someone else. She tried tears next, the delicate kind that wouldn't ruin her makeup but would demonstrate appropriate distress. I know I hurt you. I know I handled everything wrong. But we had 8 good years together. That has to count for something. 8 good years. I remembered them differently now, as 8 years of gradually adjusting my expectations downward to accommodate someone who saw our marriage as a financial arrangement with romantic benefits. Those 8 years counted when you were part of them, I said. You declared them insufficient when you wrote that note. You can't retroactively assign them value because your alternative isn't working out as planned. I'm not asking you to take me back, Celine said, which was probably true. Ryland's appeal was diminishing as the financial reality of supporting her lifestyle became clear, but going back to me would mean admitting complete failure. I'm just asking you to be reasonable about the transition period. Give me 6 months to get my finances in order, and then I'll never ask you for anything again. 6 months of paying for her apartment while she lived with Ryland, 6 months of subsidizing their relationship while they decided if love could survive without my financial support. The proposal was insulting, but it revealed how little she understood about the situation she'd created. You left me a note, Celine. A note. After 8 years of marriage, you communicated the end of our relationship like you were canceling a subscription service. That choice has consequences. She stood up, her vulnerability act dissolving into the anger that had always been just beneath her polished surface. You're being vindictive. This isn't about protecting yourself. It's about punishing me for making a choice you didn't like. I'm being realistic, I replied. You chose freedom over security. You chose passion over stability. Now you get to experience what those choices actually mean without me as a safety net. She left without another word, slamming the door in a final display of the theatrical behavior that had defined our marriage. The sound echoed through the house for a moment, then faded into silence. Peace returned immediately. Ryland called me one last time Thursday morning, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. Look, Darian, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. This whole situation is just complicated, and maybe we could find a solution that works for everyone. His desperation was palpable through the phone. Celine's expensive lifestyle was draining his resources faster than he'd anticipated, and her expectation of continued financial support was becoming his problem. I'm listening, I said, though I had no intention of helping him solve a problem he'd created by pursuing a married woman. Maybe some kind of payment plan? Something temporary to help with the transition costs while everything gets sorted out legally? Payment plan. Ryland wanted to negotiate installment payments for stealing my wife, like she was a car he couldn't quite afford but really wanted to drive. Here's what I don't understand, Ryland, I said. You convinced Celine that you could offer her something better than what she had with me. Presumably, that included financial security along with all that passion and excitement. Are you saying you can't actually provide what you promised? The silence stretched longer this time. It's not that simple. The timing is just challenging right now. The timing will always be challenging when you're trying to maintain someone else's lifestyle on top of your own. That's basic mathematics. Maybe if we could work out some kind of short-term arrangement, Ryland started, but I cut him off. You wanted her, Ryland. You pursued her, convinced her to leave her marriage, promised her a better life. Now you have her. Congratulations. But you don't get to outsource the cost of keeping her to the husband she left. I hung up and blocked his number, cutting off his desperate attempts to negotiate a solution to a problem that was entirely of his own making. The irony was perfect. Celine had left me for someone who promised her more excitement and passion, only to discover that her new relationship couldn't support the lifestyle she'd taken for granted during our marriage. Ryland had wanted the prize without considering the cost of maintaining it. Now they were both learning what their choices actually meant in practical terms. Celine's freedom was turning out to be more expensive than either of them had calculated. Her passion was costing them both more than they could afford, personally and professionally. The Christmas dinner she'd planned with such confidence would never happen, because she no longer had access to the resources or the home that would have made it possible. Instead, she was learning to navigate a world without the financial safety net I provided for 8 years. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving Celine one last morning to reconsider her request for temporary support. Oren had prepared meticulously, organizing evidence that would make her position indefensible in front of any reasonable judge. Her own note would be read aloud in court, her abandonment of the marriage described in her own elegant handwriting. Judge Henderson has seen cases like this before, Oren told me as we walked into the courthouse. She's not sympathetic to people who abandon their marriages for affair partners, and then expect continued financial support from the spouses they left. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic courtroom scenes you see in movies. Celine sat with her attorney at one table, looking perfectly composed but unable to hide the tension in her shoulders. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not too expensive, designed to suggest someone deserving of sympathy rather than someone who'd walked away from a comfortable life by choice. When Judge Henderson called the session to order, the atmosphere became formal and serious. This wasn't about emotions or regrets or second chances. It was about law, evidence, and the practical consequences of documented choices. Celine was about to discover that courts deal in facts, not feelings, and the facts of her situation were entirely unsympathetic. Oren presented our case with surgical precision, methodically dismantling any argument for temporary support. He read Celine's note aloud, letting her own words demonstrate voluntary abandonment of the marriage. He presented financial records showing her minimal contribution to household expenses despite substantial personal spending. Finally, he documented her ongoing relationship with Rylan, proving that any financial hardship was the direct result of her choice to leave a stable marriage for an uncertain affair. Your Honor, Celine's attorney argued, my client is facing genuine hardship after 8 years of marriage in which she reasonably expected continued financial partnership. Temporary support would simply provide stability during the transition period. Judge Henderson reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many similar cases to be swayed by emotional appeals. The respondent's own written statement indicates a deliberate choice to abandon the marriage in favor of another relationship, she noted. The petitioner has no obligation to subsidize that choice through temporary support payments. The ruling was swift and decisive. No temporary support. No access to joint assets. No legal requirement for me to fund Celine's new life with Rylan. She'd gambled everything on a relationship that couldn't support the lifestyle she'd taken for granted, and now she was facing the consequences of that gamble without a safety net. When we left the courthouse, Celine was crying again, but this time the tears looked genuine rather than calculated. Rylan was waiting in the parking lot, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeated slump of his shoulders. He'd probably hoped the court would solve his financial problem by ordering me to continue supporting Celine during their relationship. Instead, he was facing the full cost of his romantic adventure without legal backup. I watched him put his arm around Celine, both of them trying to look like partners facing adversity together rather than two people discovering that their passion couldn't pay the bills. Their body language told a different story. The subtle distance that develops when financial stress starts undermining romantic feelings. They'll be fine, Oren said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. People adapt to their circumstances eventually. But adaptation would require Celine to accept a lifestyle far below what she'd grown accustomed to during our marriage, and Rylan to support someone with expensive tastes on a single income already stretched by professional difficulties. Their great romance was about to be tested by the kind of mundane financial pressures that destroy relationships faster than any dramatic betrayal. As I drove home to my house, my space, my life that no longer required constant negotiation with someone else's expectations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction with my own company. The silence in the car wasn't empty or lonely. It was peaceful, full of possibility rather than tension. Celine moved back in with her mother the following week, a temporary arrangement that became permanent when her relationship with Rylan collapsed under the weight of financial reality and professional embarrassment. I learned this through the same network of mutual acquaintances who'd kept me updated on their decline, as if everyone felt compelled to provide me with evidence that justice had been served. Her childhood bedroom, with its high school trophies and college pennants, must have felt like a prison after years of adult independence and financial freedom. But it was the consequence of choices she'd made, prioritizing excitement over security until she had neither. Rylan had apparently decided that love wasn't worth the cost of supporting someone else's lifestyle, especially when that lifestyle came with professional complications that threatened his career. He'd found other romantic interests, women who came without the baggage of expensive tastes and abandoned husbands seeking legal satisfaction. Meanwhile, I was discovering the simple pleasure of making decisions based solely on my own preferences and priorities. The house felt larger without Celine's constant projects and complaints. My bank account grew steadily without her impulsive purchases and grand plans. Most importantly, my stress levels dropped to nothing without the daily management of someone else's emotional needs and financial expectations. I'd gained something more valuable than money in the divorce. I'd regained myself. Oren and I celebrated the final divorce decree at a quiet bar downtown. Two professionals who'd successfully navigated a complex legal situation without unnecessary drama or expense. Clean victories are rare in family law, he said, raising his glass of bourbon. Usually, everyone loses something important. But Celine essentially wrote our entire case for us in that note. The final settlement was everything we'd hoped for and more. I kept the house, the savings, the investments, and my retirement accounts. Celine received her personal belongings, her car, and the freedom she'd claimed to want so desperately. No alimony, no ongoing financial obligations, no shared assets that would require future contact or negotiation. She could have had half of everything if she'd filed for divorce before running off with Rylan, Oren noted. Instead, she chose drama over strategy and lost almost everything. We drank to clean endings and new beginnings, to the value of careful planning and the importance of surrounding yourself with competent professionals when life gets complicated. The bar was quiet, filled with the kind of people who preferred conversation to entertainment, exactly my kind of environment now that I didn't have to accommodate someone else's need for constant excitement and stimulation. When I got home that night, I walked through my house appreciating every detail that was now entirely mine to enjoy or change as I pleased. 6 months later, I ran into Celine at the grocery store, both of us reaching for coffee in the same aisle where we'd once planned meals together. She looked older, more tired, her expensive wardrobe replaced by clothes that suggested careful budgeting rather than impulsive shopping. We exchanged polite greetings, the kind of distant courtesy you offer to someone you once knew well, but no longer have anything meaningful to share with. "You look good," she said, and I could tell she meant it. The stress that had defined the last years of our marriage was gone from my face, replaced by the calm that comes from living life on your own terms. "I'm doing well," I replied, because it was true. I was healthier, happier, more financially secure, and more emotionally stable than I'd been in years. She'd given me the greatest gift possible by leaving, though that certainly hadn't been her intention. Her search for freedom had freed us both, though only one of us had landed in a better place. As I watched her walk away, pushing a cart full of generic brands and careful choices, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Celine had wanted freedom from the constraints of our marriage, and she'd found it. What she'd discovered was that freedom without financial security isn't liberation, it's just expensive uncertainty. I'd found my own freedom in the ruins of what she'd destroyed, building something better from the wreckage of her choices. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while your enemies discover the true cost of their decisions.